Namaskar and thanks for joining us here on Midday Prime. Over the next hour, we'll give you an update on all that's newsworthy in India and the world, and from the world of business and sports, and the situation in Ukraine after yesterday's multiple strikes by Russia in retaliation to an attack by Ukraine on a bridge joining Crimea to Russia over the weekend. That's our top story. But of course, let's begin, as always, with the headlines. Prime Minister Narendra Modi addresses the second United Nations World Geospatial Information Congress via a video message and calls technology and talent as key pillars of India's development journey. Asserts that India is working on a vision of Antodaya, which means empowering the last person at the last mile in a mission mode. UNWGIC to hold a public vote and not a secret ballot on a draft resolution that would condemn Russia's illegal annexation of 4 Ukrainian regions. Only 13 countries opposed holding a public vote on the draft resolution. Another 39 countries abstained, and the remaining countries did not vote at all. Sprucing up Ukrainian air defense takes preeminence as the Ukrainian President Zelenskyy talks to the US President Joe Biden regarding the ongoing developments. Biden announces a new $625 million security assistance package. Zelenskyy to hold emergency talks with the G7 leaders later today. The Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman embarks on an official visit to the United States. She'll be attending the annual meetings of the IMF and the World Bank and will participate in the G20 finance ministers and central bank governors meetings, besides bilateral meetings with several countries. The tech-heavy Nasdaq posted its lowest close in more than 2 years as investors continued to worry about the pace of central bank tightening and its impact on the economy. 7 of the 11 primary S&P 500 sectors end in the red. JP Morgan Chase chief executive warns that the US is likely to tip into an economic recession in 6 to 9 months. India to hold the 7th edition of the FIFA Under-17 Women's World Cup 2022 from today. The Indian team to begin their campaign with a match against the US on the very first day. 16 teams are participating in this mega competition. So at the top of the hour, we begin with the big news, as always. India has voted in favor of a public vote on the draft resolution, along with more than 100 countries rejecting Russia's plan for a secret ballot in the United Nations General Assembly. This is on a draft resolution to denounce Moscow's illegal annexation of 4 areas of Ukraine. Russia insisted on a secret ballot vote for the resolution, and China and Russia were 2 of the nations that in fact abstained. Here's a report.
Russia faced backlash in United Nations General Assembly over its proposal to hold a secret vote on whether to condemn Moscow's move to annex 4 partially occupied regions in Ukraine. The UN General Assembly rejected Moscow's demand after 107 UN member states, including India, voted in favor of a recorded vote. Only 13 countries opposed holding a public vote on the draft resolution. Another 39 countries abstained, and the remaining countries did not vote. Diplomats informed that the vote on the resolution would likely be held on Wednesday. Russia moved to annex 4 Ukrainian territories, including Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson and Zaporizhia, after holding referendums. Ukraine and its allies have denounced the votes as illegal and coercive.
The war in Ukraine should have been never started. But it will end one day. Guns will be silent. But when? At what cost? How many people will have died? How many families separated? How much more suffering endured?
Ukrainian ambassador to the United Nations yet again termed Moscow as a terrorist state, saying it has time and again targeted civilians.
The entire world has once again seen the true face of the terrorist state that kills our people. Suffering defeats on the battlefield, Russia takes it out on the peaceful residents of Ukrainian cities. Deliberate targeting of civilians is a war crime. By launching missile attacks on civilians, sleeping in their homes or rushing to work, children going to schools, Russia has proven once again that it is a terrorist state that must be deterred in the strongest possible ways.
Russia's ambassador decried the debate as a one-sided exercise in pushing an anti-Russian narrative.
This is particularly clear, and this assertion of the politicized nature of which stems from the fact that it is convened specifically to push forward the narrative against one state, the Russian Federation. All other aspects of the Ukrainian crisis, the foundations for which were laid by the Western states, at least in 2014. But actually long before then are being left outside of the scope of the discussion. It's as though there had not been at anti-constitutional cope, depriving the Russian speakers of their rights.
Meanwhile, United Nations members expressed solidarity with Ukraine, saying Putin was overturning the most sacred principle in the international system and urged other member states to support the sovereignty of Ukraine with their vote.
This Assembly's call on Russia since the start of its illegal invasion has been simple. End this war and withdraw from Ukraine. For the sake of Ukraine, Russia and the entire UN membership, we reiterate this call today. We call on Russia to end the war and honour the UN Charter.
By willfully undermining the rules-based international order and blatantly and repeatedly violating Ukraine's independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity, Russia is putting global peace and security at risk.
Voting in favor of the proposed resolution is a much-desired sign of solidarity. Solidarity not only with Ukraine, but with all those who can share the same fate in the future. To us, Poland, this is a very embodiment of the UN Golden Rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
A proposed assembly resolution would demand that Moscow immediately and unconditionally scrap its supposed annexations and call on all countries not to recognize them. The measure, spearheaded by the European Union, also would insist upon the immediate, complete and unconditional withdrawal of Russian forces from all of Ukraine's internationally recognized territory. Russia vetoed a similar resolution in the 15-member Security Council last month. It has been trying to chip away at its international isolation after nearly three-quarters of the General Assembly reprimanded Moscow and demanded it withdraw its troops within a week of its war with Ukraine. The moves at the United Nations mirror what happened in 2014 after Russia annexed Ukraine's Crimea. At the Security Council, Russia vetoed a draft resolution that opposed a referendum on the status of Crimea and urged countries not to recognize it. The General Assembly then adopted a resolution declaring the referendum invalid with 100 votes in favour, 11 against and 58 formal abstentions, while 24 countries did not take part. Bureau Report, DD India.
Well, amid the nuclear threats in the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict, the United States has said that it has no indication that Russia is preparing to use nuclear weapons. Although the White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre has said that the United States will take nuclear saber-rattling by the Russian president quite seriously.
Ukraine, nothing, no action on Ukraine without Ukraine, right? That is something when it comes to any type of diplomacy or conversation that's being had, that certainly they have to be in the room for that piece. And look, when it comes to the potential nuclear threat, we have been very clear about that. We take any nuclear weapons or nuclear saber rattling very seriously here. But I do want to say, that we have not seen any reason to adjust our own strategic nuclear posture, nor do we have indication that Russia is preparing to imminently use nuclear weapons. What you're seeing, the $600 million that we announced today of nuclear assistance, of security assistance, is just a continued commitment that we have showed to Ukraine, because as you all know, they are fighting.
Well, Russia's deadly missile attacks on Kiev left a trail of devastation across the Ukrainian capital. The attacks claimed 8 lives and injured 7, according to Kiev's mayor, Vitaly Klitschko. The subway services in the Ukrainian capital were suspended to provide shelter to the public. At least 11 key infrastructure facilities in 8 Ukrainian regions have been damaged in Russia's missile attacks. Kiev was rocked by multiple explosions on Monday, the first such attacks in the region since the conflict broke out. The deadly blasts are Russia's stated retaliation to explosions on Crimea's Kerch Bridge. Now, as Russia escalated the attacks in Ukraine, launching missiles across several cities on Monday, a video showcased large explosions in the city of Dnipro. Cars and pedestrians, they were seen escaping the attack in this video shot in a dash cam, and a large plume of smoke also was seen rising from the immediate horizon, causing traffic to stop before a fiery explosion sent debris crashing down into the cars below. Ukraine's capital Kiev, along with Lviv, Ternopil and Zhytomyr in western Ukraine, were targeted by these strikes. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy vowed to restore services in Kiev destroyed by Russian missiles. In his nightly address, Zelenskyy said that the restoration work is underway. Zelenskyy blamed the Russian strikes. They said they were deliberately timed to kill people and knock out power, Ukraine's power grid.
Now across the whole country, restoration works are ongoing. We will restore all objects which were damaged by today's strike of Russian terrorists. It is only a question of time. I set a task for all structures of our state to work so that the restoration would be as fast as possible. In part of cities, in part of regions where the supply of electricity was disrupted due to shelling, the electricity supply has already been resumed.
The US President Joe Biden has condemned the missile strikes in Ukraine. In a tweet, the president said, the US condemns Russia's missile strikes today across Ukraine, which injured and killed civilians and demonstrated once again the brutality of Putin's illegal war. These attacks only reinforce our commitment to stand with the people of Ukraine for as long as it takes. As Ukraine continues to witness repeated shelling, President Zelenskyy said he had a productive conversation with his U.S. counterpart regarding the ongoing developments. In a message on social media, Zelenskyy said, had a productive conversation with the U.S. President Joe Biden. The main topic of discussion was air defense. Currently, this is the #1 priority in our defense cooperation. America's leadership, G7 stance and support for our UNGA resolution are very important for Ukraine. Well, the G7 leaders and the Ukrainian President Zelenskyy will hold emergency talks today. They were going to discuss the latest situation, the latest Russian attacks on Ukraine. The German Chancellor Olaf Scholz assured Zelenskyy of solidarity of Germany and other G7 states. The European Union calls Russia targeting civilians as amounting to a war crime. Now, amid all this chaos, the Ukrainian government has asked its citizens to minimize evening electricity usage as the Russian missiles rained across Ukraine, damaging the power grid. The deputy head of the Ukrainian president's office has appeared in a video asking Ukrainians to use less power, standing in front of a damaged pylon which he claimed was hit by a Russian missile. Tomoshenko, he said that many strikes they had hit the grid infrastructure. And now we are joined by Professor Sanjay Pandey from the School of International Studies, JNU, who is joining us via Zoom, an expert on foreign policy and politics of Russia and Central Asia. Thank you very much, Professor Pandey. Let me start by asking you if ending the anti-Russia geopolitical project, that was Russia's aim, isn't it far from that, what it's achieving?
Well, it is definitely very far from that. And the war has entered a very new and dangerous phase in which Russia, after a long gap, has started attacking civilian targets in Kyiv and elsewhere in Ukraine. For past many months, this was not seen. And the civilian targets include hospitals, children's playgrounds, energy infrastructure. And in view of the coming winters, this may cause a disruption in Ukraine, which the ordinary people will feel very badly and will be affected very badly. So the war is entering a very dangerous new phase. It can be called a war of attrition, where there is stalemate and where both the parties are trying to wear down each other in the hope that the other will come to the negotiating table and the objectives that one is seeking, one will be able to achieve.
Indeed. Professor Pandey, the military aid to Ukraine, it's being interpreted by Russia as aggression. Now, is there room for negotiation because the aid is going to continue because they're looking for a military defense and through that perhaps a long-term military solution?
Yes, in fact, both the parties are trying to maximize their advantage on the ground. In the last few weeks, the Ukrainian forces have achieved some success on the ground, able to retrieve some of the territories that they had earlier lost to Russia. On the other hand, the Russians, feeling under pressure, have resorted to the use of these missiles. According to one estimate, 75 missiles were fired yesterday. And so both the parties are trying to prove to the other that the best course of action would be to come to the negotiating table, especially for Russia. The Ukrainians, of course, would like to press ahead with their advantage, which initially it seemed they had limited success.
Okay.
But now, after the Kerch attack on the Russian bridge, it seems that Russians are now warning Ukraine that they are ready to go to any extent.
Right, absolutely.
In order to make it clear to Ukraine and its allies that escalation will cost very dearly to Ukraine.
Indeed. So yesterday's escalation, as you say, has surprised the world because of the extent of its retaliation. Some are even wondering whether nuclear blackmail, which is also being talked about, is part of the escalation ladder, and how seriously is the threat of the use of WMD.
There are very conflicting reports about it. A week or so back, both Putin and Biden made certain statements which suggested that such a possibility is there. But subsequently, in last 1 or 2 days, the Biden administration has tried to bring down the rhetoric by saying that perhaps this is not a possibility. But we should keep in mind the fact that Russia cannot be seen as having been defeated or on the back foot. In order to avoid such an eventuality, I'm afraid the Russian president is ready to go to any extent. If not nuclear, at least some other weapons of mass destruction or maybe chemical weapons might be used. These possibilities cannot be totally ruled out, and it is the best course for strategic planners to keep that in mind as a possibility while taking any course of action. So perhaps the Ukrainians and their supporters in the West should keep that in mind.
And you know, how is the war, the mobilization efforts in Russia of all the you know, through conscription, the economic impact there? How is it affecting the average man in Russia? The reports are conflicting, but you know, I mean, surely that also could be a sign, you know, for Putin to either draw back or to press ahead.
Yes, as you said, the reports are conflicting. On the one hand, there are reasons to believe that majority of the Russians see it as an existential threat to Russia. I mean, Ukraine and the policies followed by NATO. And in that sense, they consider it as a nationalist war. And Putin is getting, I mean, substantial support from the common people. Although there were reports about 2 weeks back when conscription was announced that a large number of people are leaving Russia, but a larger number are also willingly joining the war effort. So one should not doubt that the ability and the resolve of both the government of Russia and the people not to be seen as losing the war. The economic impact of the war, again, is a very complex issue. There is an impact, no doubt, and the sanctions that are likely to be imposed now will create further hardships.
Sure.
But it is also true that some of the initial assumptions and estimates about the way Russian economy will go into a free fall or would collapse have not come true.
Okay.
So there is a lot of confusion in this regard.
Indeed, and we are talking on a day when the G7 is going to have a virtual meeting, and of course Zelenskyy is also going to participate in that. What do you think the G7 has to offer as a modus vivendi for Russia to try and, you know, reach some form of negotiation?
I mean, one is not sure whether anyone is seriously willing to talk to Russia, as long as Russia is occupying Ukrainian territory and has already declared 4 of the regions as part of Russia with an intent to defend these regions, which are now, according to Putin, integral part of Russia. But I feel there should be some saner voice or voices among G7 which can negotiate for an immediate cessation of the hostility without pronouncing what is the position on the ground.
One step at a time.
Yes. So that is the only course of action left now. Some people believe that with the onset of winters, the war might be stalemated, but it is also true, and it is also quite probable that the Russians might resort to large-scale attacks in the hope that the Ukrainians hit by the winter and the lack of gas supplies will not be able to retaliate. So they may try to press their advantage, which they have shown yesterday.
A final question about Russia's abilities economically. You know, I mean, there were sanctions imposed on Russia after the takeover of Crimea, and it built the bridge after that, the Kerch Bridge, which is a massive project, I mean the largest bridge in Europe. And we are seeing now that it's willing to go to any extent to defend the territory that it's claiming through annexations. So, I mean, this whole concept of sanctions on Russia, doesn't seem to affect their economy to that extent. I mean, if they can invest in these massive projects which are costing billions of dollars, where are they getting the money from?
Absolutely. I mean, this bridge was built after 2014,
yes,
after the sanctions that were put, initial sanctions after the Crimean annexation. So, and despite that, in 2018, they were able to launch this bridge, inaugurate this bridge, which is 19 kilometers long. It is one of the biggest such bridges in the world and in Europe. And last 7 months have also made it very clear that Russians are not going to buckle down due to threat of economic sanctions. They have found their own ways. Their dependence of China might have increased, but they have also found partners like India and others, and they hope to build on that partnership and to somehow minimize the impact of sanctions, and they are not averse to stopping gas supplies or even sabotaging. I mean, it is not clear who sabotaged the Nord Stream, but there are reasons to believe that certain elements in Russian establishment might be involved in that. So they are not afraid of the impact of stopping gas supplies to Europe. So no one should be in any illusion on that count.
We leave it there. Thank you very much, Professor Sanjay Pandey, for enlightening us on the subject and for your perspective. Moving on then to our next story. Let's move on to our developing story now. The Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has accused Westminster of lacking any respect at all for democracy. Now, she's rallied for her Scottish National Party ahead of a court battle for a fresh vote on independence, because Nicola Sturgeon said on Monday that a second referendum on independence of Scotland from the UK will happen in October next year if Britain's top court approves it. So Britain's Supreme Court will begin hearing arguments for allowing a secession vote without the approval of the British Prime Minister Liz Truss and her government.
Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said on Monday a second referendum on independence will happen in October next year if Britain's top court approves. Britain's Supreme Court on Tuesday begins hearing arguments for allowing a succession vote without approval from British Prime Minister Liz Truss and her government.
Whether it's Tory or Labour, Labour or Tory, it's not us who gets to decide. Our votes don't determine who gets to occupy number 10. For Scotland, the problem is not just which party is in power at Westminster, the problem is Westminster. And to fix that, to make sure we get the governments that the largest number of us vote for, always, not just occasionally. For that, my friends, we need Scotland's independence. But Westminster has no such respect. That means this issue was always destined to end up in court sooner or later. Better, in my view, that it is sooner. If the court decides in the way we hope it does, on 19th October next year, there will be an independence referendum.
In a 2014 plebiscite, which the British government approved, Scots rejected independence by 55% to 45%. However, the Scottish National Party argues the vote for Britain to leave the European Union 2 years later was a game changer. Scottish Prime Minister hinted that the struggle for moving away from UK will continue.
And if the court doesn't decide that way, well, first and obviously, we will respect that judgment. We believe in the rule of law. And as a party and a movement, we will, of course, reflect. But fundamentally, it will leave us with a very simple choice. Put our case for independence to the people in an election, or give up on Scottish democracy. Conference, I don't know about you. Actually, I suspect I do know about you. But I will never, ever give up on Scottish democracy.
Sturgeon voiced her verdict on the Truss's Conservative government's handling of the cost of living crisis.
But when global turbulence strikes, national governments have a duty to act in ways that mitigate rather than exacerbate the impacts on their own populations. When it comes to the cost of living crisis and so much else besides, this UK government is utterly failing in that duty.
Sturgeon argues that as voters backed pro-independence parties in elections for the Scottish Parliament last year, there was a mandate for them to bring forward a bill to hold a referendum on October 19, 2023.
Time now for our National Prime segment. Prime Minister Narendra Modi addressed the second United Nations World Geospatial Information Congress, and the Prime Minister said that geospatial technology has been driving inclusion and progress. The Prime Minister also highlighted how the government has been using geospatial technology to provide maximum benefits of schemes to the people. Let's listen.
You will be extremely happy to know geospatial technology has been driving inclusion and progress. Take our Swamitva scheme for example. We are using drones to map properties in villages. Using that data, villagers are receiving property cards. For the first time in decades, people in rural areas have clear documents of ownership. PM Gati Shakti Master Plan is building multimodal infrastructure. It is being powered by geospatial technology. Our digital ocean platform is using geospatial technology for management of our oceans. This is crucial for our environment and marine ecosystem. India has already set an example in sharing the benefits of geospatial technology.
Well, the Prime Minister also called technology and talent the key pillars of India's development journey, lauding India's top position in making real-time digital payments. The Prime Minister said that technology brings transformation and helps the government to reach out to the deprived, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic.
India's development journey, two pillars are key: technology and talent. Let us look at the first pillar, technology. Technology brings transformation. India is the world's #1 in real-time digital payments. If you venture out, you will see even the smallest vendors accept, even prefer digital payments. Similarly, it was through technology that we helped the poor during COVID-19. Now let us come to the second pillar, talent. India is a young nation with great innovative spirit. We are among the top startup hubs in the world. Since 2021, we have almost doubled the number of unicorn startups. This is due to India's young talent.
And the Prime Minister also stressed on the need to have an institutional approach by nations to help each other during a crisis. And he said that global organizations like the United Nations, they can lead the way in taking resources to the last mile in every region. He said that the COVID pandemic should have been a wake-up call for the world to take everyone along. He added that billions in developing countries in the developing world, they need diagnostics, medicines, medicinal equipment, vaccines and more.
COVID-19 pandemic should have been a wake-up call for the world in taking everyone along. Billions of people in the developing world needed diagnostics, medicines, medical equipments, vaccines and more. yet they were left to their own fate. There is a need for an institutional approach by the international community to help each other during a crisis. Global organizations like the United Nations can lead the way in taking resources to the last mile in every region. Even in fighting climate change, hand-holding and technology transfer are crucial.
And the Prime Minister also said that India has been working on a vision of Antodaya, which means empowering the last person at the last mile in the mission mode. The Prime Minister added that it is this vision that has guided India in the last mile empowerment on a massive scale.
We have been working on a vision of Antyodaya, which means empowering the last person at the last mile in a mission mode. It is the vision that has guided us in last mile empowerment at a massive scale.
Well, in the last leg of his Gujarat visit, the Prime Minister addressed a public gathering at Jamkandorna in Rajkot, and the Prime Minister received a rousing welcome upon reaching there. In his address, the Prime Minister said that Gujarat's confidence is at its peak, and he said that the development of Gujarat has become a mass movement. The Prime Minister further added that the state has achieved new heights in the field of education in the last 20 years, and Gujarat has paid special attention to good governance. Earlier, Prime Minister Narendra Modi took part in a grand roadshow in Rajkot, and people in large numbers, they gathered to just get a glimpse of the Prime Minister. And you're watching Midday Prime. Time now for news and updates from the world of business. And keeping track of all the business indicators is Tanvi Taneja. Over to you.
Thank you, Mark. Fears of global recession growing. World Bank President David Malpass and International Monetary Fund Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva warned on Monday of a growing risk of global recession and said that inflation remained a continuing problem after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. There's a risk and a real danger, including Japan, South Korea, Saudi Arabia, Australia, Bhutan, New Zealand, Egypt, Germany, Mauritius, the UAE, Iran and the Netherlands. The finance minister will also hold one-on-one meetings with the leaders and heads of the OECD, European Commission and the UNDP. In a high-level meeting, the finance minister will meet the US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and World Bank President David Malpass separately to discuss issues of mutual interest. During her 6-day visit, Union Finance Minister will also participate in a side chat on India's economic prospects and role in the world economy at the Brookings Institution, a prominent non-profit public policy organization based in Washington, D.C. During the visit, Sitharaman will share her thoughts on India's unique digital public goods story and multiplier effects created in India through the interlinkages of technology, finance and governance at the School of Advanced International Studies at the Johns Hopkins University. In stock market news now. Key Asian stock markets fell on Tuesday with investors worried about rising interest rates and an escalation in the Ukraine war. So MSCI's broadest index of Asia-Pacific shares outside Japan fell 1.8% to a two-year low, led by a deepening slide for chip makers and China tech stocks in the wake of the US export curbs aimed at hurting Chinese technology development. Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing company SMSC slumped 8%. Japan's Nikkei 225 index dropped 2.6%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng index shed 2.2%. But China's Shanghai Composite Index advanced 0.2% when reports last came in. Overnight on Wall Street, key US stock indices declined on Monday as investors worried about the impact of more interest rate hikes and pulled out of technology shares and chip makers after the US announced restrictions aimed at hobbling China's semiconductor industry. US Federal Reserve Vice Chair Lyle Brainard said that the tighter US monetary policy has begun to be felt in an economy that may be slowing faster than expected. But the full brunt of Fed interest rate increases still won't be apparent for months. Investors were also cautious ahead of the US third quarter earnings season, which is set to kick off on Friday with results from some of the major banks expected. So the S&P 500 lost 0.8%, Nasdaq Composite Index lost 1%, and the Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 0.3%. Microsoft was among the biggest drags on the three major indices. Investors are also cautiously looking to the September US Consumer Price Index due on Thursday for the latest indication of what the inflation picture in the US looks like.
If the Fed's going to be able to orchestrate a soft landing, and by their own words, if they do, it's going to be a very narrow path that they're going to be walking down to make that happen. And the problem with today, or the near term, is that we just don't know yet. And so what they've been clear on is that until they see some consistent data on inflation looking a lot better, they're not going to change their rhetoric. And so right now where the market is, floating around near, 24, 25% on the S&P, I think has been predicated on pricing in maybe 1.25% more of a rate hike prior to the year end, and then maybe another 25 basis points afterwards. So if it ends up more hawkish than that, then I think the stock market's got more room to go down.
So the tech-heavy Nasdaq posted its lowest close in more than 2 years, and JP Morgan Chase chief executive on Monday warned that the United States is likely to tip into an economic recession in 6 to 9 months. Jamie Dimon, CEO of the US top bank JP Morgan Chase, said that the recession may not be as serious as the global financial crisis in 2008, but warned that runaway inflation, big interest rate hikes, Russia-Ukraine conflicts and some other factors will bring uncertainties to the future. Diamond said that he couldn't say how long the recession might last and alerted market participants to evaluate the consequences. And the global crude oil prices slid on Tuesday, extending losses of nearly 2% in the previous session as a stronger US dollar and flare-up in COVID-19 cases in China raised concerns of slowing global demand. So Brent crude fell 21 cents to $95.98 a barrel. US crude was at $90.82 a barrel, down 31 cents or 0.3% after losing $1.51 in the previous session. So that's it from the world of business. Back to you, Mark.
Thanks very much, Tanvi, for bringing us up to speed with the business world. And now let's get you news that's coming in from across the globe. The large-scale protests against the death of Mahsa Amini, they continue to grip Iran, inviting immense condemnation from the world over the crackdown on protesters as well. Meanwhile, Iran has warned that it will not allow any country to interfere in its internal affairs. Here's a report.
The protests in Iran have entered the fourth week with the participation of teenage girls from high schools, something unprecedented in Iran and perhaps rare in other parts of the world. Presence of young and teenage girls in the agitation and their level of anger and frustration against the Iranian authorities, especially Ayatollah Khamenei himself, reveals a new mode of revolt. Amidst the worldwide condemnation over the crackdown on protests sparked by the death of Mahsa Amini, Iran government has warned that it will not allow any country to interfere in the internal affairs. Iran's foreign ministry called the recent uprising as an internal issue.
The internal issue of the Islamic Republic of Iran is related to the government and the nation of Iran. We will not allow any country to interfere in the internal affairs of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Meanwhile, in France, demonstrators took to streets in solidarity with protesters in Iran. Chanting slogans, the protesters marched across Paris to the iconic Palestina Republic on Sunday. Amid the ongoing protests, the family of Mahsa Amini said that they have received death threats and have been warned not to get involved in the demonstrations. According to a human rights group, at least 185 people, including at least 19 children, have been killed in the demonstrations so far. Anti-hijab protests began on September 17th at the funeral of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini, who was killed in the custody of morality police. The demonstrations have turned into the biggest challenge to Iran's clerical leaders in years, with protesters calling for the downfall of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei.
And the South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol today said that North Korea has nothing to gain from nuclear weapons as the isolated country seeks to beef up its capability to attack its southern neighbor. Seoul's reaction came hours after Pyongyang disclosed that it fired missiles, including a nuclear-capable missile, during a 2-week-long military drill. And also, on Monday, North Korea's state media said that the leader Kim Jong-un guided the nuclear tactical exercises targeting South Korea over the past 2 weeks in protest over recent joint naval drills by South Korean and US forces involving the aircraft carrier Ronald Reagan. However, the Seoul official said that they would continue efforts to ease tension through dialogue and diplomacy, while North has again rejected any dialogue with the US and South Korea.
North Korea is advancing its nuclear development and threatening not only the Republic of Korea but the world. I believe it has nothing to gain from nuclear weapons. As I have been constantly emphasizing, we will be prepared by establishing a solid response system based on the strong Korea-US alliance and the security cooperation between South Korea and the US, and respond accordingly.
The death toll from tropical storm Julia rose to at least 25 on Monday. This is what officials have said, and most of the victims have come from El Salvador and Honduras, as the weakening storm had dumped heavy rainfall on a swath of Central America as well as southern Mexico. Salvadoran authorities, they reported the deaths of 9 people as of Monday due to Julia, including 5 soldiers, while at least 380 people had been evacuated. The authorities in both El Salvador and Guatemala, they have cancelled classes. And so officials also, they've added that in Honduras, 5 victims have been confirmed, including a 22-year-old woman who died after she was swept away by floods waters, and a young woman and a 4-year-old boy in a boat that capsized near the Nicaragua border. Whereas the National Hurricane Center has said that heavy rains could still cause life-threatening flash floods and mudslides as it is expected in El Salvador as well as southern Guatemala. Julia made landfall on Sunday in Nicaragua's Caribbean coast before crossing into the Pacific Ocean. An update now on Thailand shooting. Well, Buddhist funeral rites have begun in the grieving town of Uthai Sawan in northeastern Thailand, where families are mourning the loss of children who were killed in a massacre at a daycare center. Toys, flowers, milk bottles and sweets were placed alongside the small child-sized coffins, many bearing photographs of the children who were killed in the attack, as the mourners paid their respects to the victims during these ceremonies. Our family members prayed in front as well as around the many coffins covered with portraits and toys. Funerals have begun in some of the temples where the bodies were moved. They were returned to the families following the autopsies. Now, as a former policeman had killed these people, Former policemen killed 34 people, out of which 23 were young children in the Uthai Sawan, which is a town 500 kilometers northeast of Bangkok, the capital of a largely Buddhist country. Most of those who died were sleeping when the ex-officer forced his way into the center with a knife and a gun, shooting staff before entering classrooms. Police identified the attacker as Panya Kamrap, who was 34 years old, a former police sergeant who had been suspended because of drug allegations and was facing trial on drug charges. Now, for the second year running, as an official US holiday, Indigenous Peoples Day is being was marked on Monday in New York alongside Columbus Day, and some 50 people, many in traditional Native American garments, gathered at sunrise in New York City's Randall Island. They waded into the waters of the East River to mark the day. New York City has traditionally played host to the nation's largest Columbus Day parade. Columbus Day parades are also being held in Chicago, Cleveland, as well as Philadelphia. Last year, the US President Joe Biden declared an official Indigenous Peoples Day to coincide with Columbus Day for the first time. Now, rice growers in South Korea are worried by low buying prices amid the COVID-19 pandemic, with majority farmers failing to break even due to rising material costs, despite seeing bumper harvests. According to the latest data from South Korea's Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, the price of 20 kilograms of rice fell 24.9% from a year earlier in September, the biggest drop in 45 years. Meanwhile, South Korea is expected to consume only 51.9 kilograms of rice per person, less than half of what it consumed 30 years ago, as the demand for rice from schools, businesses and restaurants has yet to recover because of that pandemic, and it's still ongoing there. In fact, with the supply surplus, the price of rice has in fact kept declining in recent years. The South Korean government announced its largest ever rice purchase plan at the end of September, preparing to buy 100,000 tons of inventory rice and 350,000 tons of new rice from October 20. An update now on the energy strikes in France. Well, French motorists are worried that they will be unable to fill up their tanks as trade unions continue strikes at oil refineries and storage sites, leaving a third of the country's fuel stations running short. Some fuel stations were closed in southern France, while long tailbacks are formed in other parts as drivers tried to fill up before more pumps run dry. Meanwhile, in central Paris, motorists struck gold in finding some rare petrol, causing a queue of cars to form in the street. The industrial action at Total Energies, which coincides with the strikes at two ExxonMobil refineries in France, comes as the workers across Europe demand higher salaries to cope with surging inflation and the cost of living crisis. France's CGT trade union denounced on Monday Total Energies' conditional offer of early wage talks as blackmail, saying that strikes that have left a third of the country's fuel stations running short would continue till today. And the President, Emmanuel Macron, whose government is under mounting pressure to act as the strike grinds on and more fuel stations run dry, he's called for a quick end to the crisis. Now, protesters have protests have been staged in different parts of Haiti. They are demanding Prime Minister Ariel Henry's resignation. And although at least one person died, in fact, during clashes with the police in Haiti, as the citizens' frustration at the government has been mounting. So riot officers, they were seen shouting and they were also shooting tear gas. They were dispersing protesters as they threw stones at them in return. So the protesters were carrying the body of a woman, in fact, who died as a protest derailed to looting in a hotel in the capital city of Port-au-Prince. Demonstrations are taking place there, and demonstrators had said that she was killed by the police. Sporadic looting and gun battles between gangs and police have also been increasingly become common in Haiti. This is in recent weeks because of fuel shortages that have led to mounting frustration and desperation. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has proposed a rapid action force to help Haiti's police to confront the gangs that are now on the rampage, without saying that the United Nations itself would lead any such force. A quick update on sports now. So the men in blue, they take the field against South Africa in the third and final match of the series, and this match is delayed because of a wet outfield. It's happening right here in Delhi. In fact, we have news that the match has started. In fact, Shikhar Dhawan won the toss and elected to bowl first. There was no change in the Indian side. However, David Miller is leading the South African side and Keshav Maharaj is unwell. We have some news that reports are coming in. The 28 for 3, in fact. South Africa is at the crease, 28 for 3, having a tough time batting right now. With that, we conclude. That, of course, was a brief update on the match that's taking place in Delhi. Thanks for watching. Namaskar.